First, thank you so much for speaking with me. Like, it's a huge honor. I did not imagine that I would be speaking to you so soon. When I was writing my plans, I was hoping to read The Whispering Trees, Dreams, and Assorted Nightmares too.
Mhm.
Well, no, I mean, I believe that when for your next novel like this, I shall come again and beg for some time. So, let's not rush it. So,
That's fine.
just to start with, how are you? Where are you? And how's the year been?
I'm good. I am in Iowa City. So I spend most of my time between Iowa City and Nigeria when it's possible. I haven't been to Nigeria since 2024, I think, because of travel issues and there's uncertainty
Mm,
with all of that. So I've missed Nigeria a lot, a lot, And I'm someone who's like super connected to Nigeria, right? Emotionally and all of that. So not being home in over a year for me, it's a major thing. Yeah, so I'm connected a lot to the culture, to the social issues, to everything that's happening in Nigeria. So just being here for that period of time and not visiting home, that's major. That's major. Yeah, but Iowa City, Saturday, Iowa is very quiet. I like it here. I'm not a fan of big cities with all the drama and all of that. So I won't be a Lagos person. I live in Abuja normally, and I'm totally fine with Abuja. I was born and raised in Jos, of course. Uh, so yeah, maybe that gives you kind of a sense of the kind of person I am, I guess.
it does because everyone I've given your books to, they're always like, he talks a lot about Jaws, and even when you
Oh
write
yeah.
about Jaws, I think there's a line in When We're Fireflies where like Abuja is such a horrible city to walk in. It's not like Jaws where you could walk everywhere,
Yep.
the weather and all of that.
Hmm.
Yeah, even in your writing, it shows that you're very connected to the physical spaces you are
I
in.
am still connected to
Yeah.
Jos. I haven't lived in Jos since 2010, I think. Not yeah, 2010. That was when I like left Jos. But I am still. I mean, like I visited. I visit almost every year. My family is there. My friends are there. Everything of mine is still very connected to Jos. The connection to Jos is still very deep for me. Very emotional. Very social. I still haven't been able to dream of other places. Um, I think all my dreams are, if I have any dreams at all, whenever I have dreams, they're always kind of centered around Jaws. All of my characters that I imagine, they always have this connection to Jaws. Either they come from Jaws, or they've lived in Jaws, or they have to go to Jaws for something or the other. So there's that connection. It's a thing.
Right now we're in Jaws, so yeah, I'm just so happy. I'm just so happy hearing that. I read two of your books this
Hmm.
year. I read When We're
Okay.
Fireflies. It's my second time. I just dropped it,
It's just
and then
January,
of course
Shama.
season
What are you
started.
doing?
I'm, I'm actually trying to get a lot of my content out because I want to finish.
Okay.
I'm working on a small novel, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get everything out ahead of submission time.
Fantastic.
And then I read Seasons of Crimson Blossoms. Yeah, so I call this the OG copy because this was before year
Yep.
one. And yeah, I
That
love
was the
this
first
one.
edition.
There were no changes. It's just the cover, yes.
Yes, just the cover.
Flies.
Okay.
I said, let me show this to the camera so that they will know that people are buying book. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
that is good.
just speaking about the books, because I'm working on
Mm.
a review. The same stories, they feel like they're in the same universe, but I could see the difference in them like night and day. Wild Scenes of Crimson Blossoms is it's like a tragedy through and through. One of the things that struck me was the relationships in Seasons of Crimson Blossoms. It felt like while I was reading One Were Fireflies, it felt like it was a fulfillment of those relationships. Like there were those same relationships. There was still the lovers. There was still the older woman, younger man, entanglement. But when we moved into One Were Fireflies, it felt like the good guys finally won, and I was able to like get some reprieve from that. That's what I just felt when I dropped it
Mm-hmm.
an hour ago.
Okay.
And it also lies in the writing. Seasons of Crimson Blossoms was heavier, and it was much rawer. When I stepped into When We Were Fireflies, I could tell that you had changed from then. Felt like you had grown. So my first question would be, what happened in between these two books? Literature, Nigeria, just your understanding of story in general.
A lot.
Sorry, long question.
A lot.
I suppose in my eyes.
Yeah. I mean, people grow as writers. You grow as a writer as well. Season of Crimson Blossoms, I wrote that between 2010 and 2013, I think. Yeah, so it was much earlier in my career, I guess. You could say that. At the same time, it wasn't the kind of story I thought I was going to write. Yeah, like these questions of morality and sexuality and all of that. I never thought like I was going to write a book about sexual relations, for example. If you've read The Whispering Trees, for example, you'd see that it's not prudish, right? It just doesn't like, and it's not like there are no sexual encounters in it. There are, but they were not like central to the story the way it is to Season of Crimson Blossoms. And I've always had this attitude, and maybe that's moral arrogance, I think, that people have at certain points in their life. I've read books where I feel like the sexual encounters are just there for the purpose of titillating the audience, right? Like people are like, yeah, we need a sex scene now, so we have to like do it and put it in there. And I've always felt like, yeah, sometimes it just feels too labored, sometimes it just feels unnecessary, sometimes it just feels cheap. But when I came to write Season of Crimson Blossoms, I just felt like it was central to the story, right? And it was necessary. So every sexual encounter that was kind of included revealed something about the characters, about their relationship, at what stage it was, and all of that. And it was a book about relationships, but it's also a book about sexual relationship and what it makes people do and how it changes perception and to a large extent influences society, right? Because this is an encounter between two people, but then suddenly it's the business of the society, the families, and all of that, whereas it's just two adults making decisions for themselves, right? So that was something that I kind of had to contend with. I mean, at the point when I was writing it, I didn't want to think about it, about how people are going to perceive it. I just felt like, just be loyal to the story and the characters and just stay with them. So it was after I'd finished writing it that I was like, so what are people going to think about this? And I'm like, it doesn't matter because it's the story of the characters, and the characters feel satisfied with the story. I felt satisfied with the story. I'm like, it's going to be what it's going to be. If people don't like it, they don't like it. But I'm not going to be hypocritical about it to say that things like that don't exist, because they do, and they do happen in our societies. No matter how prudish we want to be, no matter how conservative we want to appear. So that was what happened with Season of Crimson Blossoms. With When We Were Fireflies, I just felt like I had moved and I'd grown as a writer. I wouldn't say I felt more liberated with that writing, because I just felt like I was more in my element, right? Because I've always been inclined to magical realism. This mix of the fantastical and the real. And you would see traces of that in The Whispering Trees, for example, if you read it. So that for me, that was like my comfort zone. But, you grow, you have experiences, and these experiences kind of find their way into your novel and all of that. So there was this 80-year-old man who is an avid reader and an avid writer as well, very prolific, incredible person. And he said, wow, you wrote this book. How did you know all these things that's happened? So that made me like think, oh, wow, okay. So if this man who is 80 and who has lived a very long life is asking me like, how did I know all these things? And when I was writing this, I didn't think like it was special. I didn't like have to do a ton of research. And this was what I realized later. I have been researching for this novel and every other novel, maybe for the entirety of my life, right? It just wasn't like deliberate. I'm researching for When We Were Fireflies. It's just like I've been reading, writing, engaging with the history of my country and all of that. So when I came to write this novel, which I did in 6 months, and I said that people are like, wow, how did you do that? It just like flowed, right? So there wasn't like any significant instance where I said, oh, I'm going to stop writing to go and do research on this, because the research has already been done, right? I just fed it into the story as well, right? Yeah, that is I guess the difference maybe.
When We Were Fireflies felt like you had been thinking about that thing for a long time, and when you decided to write it, you just picked out the essentials and left whatever long-winded diatribe.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I mean, like the story just came to me at that point, and when it came, I just knew that I had to write it, like right then. I feel like I've had ideas for stories, and I'm like, okay, you know what? Let this kind of, you know, grow. Let it just stay there, you know, for a while, and just. But when with Fireflies, like it was something that I had to do right then, like immediately. So I just started working on it, and I worked obsessively on that novel for that intense period of time that I had to write it.
I had a small theory. I think you may have heard a bit of it in our podcast about Soyaya novels and Hausa literature. Wherever I see parrots in northern literature, I think of Magana Jarichi.
Oh yeah.
Then for the Soyaya novels, it feels like you have read a lot of romantic and Soyaya novels in your youth. And I said that would be one of the first questions I would like to clear. Because I'm working on a theory that for a person that writes like you, you have to have consumed some of those. So, yeah, I'm asking now.
Okay, so let me kind of approach it this way. First, I would admit that, and I've always said that, Abubakar Imam, the author of Magana Jarichi, right, is a huge influence. I grew up reading his books and his works, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing, right? And if you go back and look at it now, you see it's sort of like that mix of the mythical, the magical, and the fantastical with the real. And that's what it does. You know, you have like Janes coming in and out of the stories, but then you have like engagement with real social issues that kind of analyze our culture and how this culture impacts our behavior and attitudes. Right, so that has always been a thing. I've been fascinated with books like that. But I read a lot of literature in Hausa, not just the Sueya novels, like because, and I think this is where sometimes I'm not saying we get it wrong with the classification of literature in Hausa, but people forget that there has always been a tradition of speculative fiction in Hausa. If you like, you can categorize Magana Jarichi as speculative fiction, but there are also literature like Iliad and Megarfi and all these fantastic stories of people traveling for adventures, going to places, encountering like fantastical beings and all of that. That has always been a tradition, right? It's always been a thing in Hausa literature. The Soeya novels didn't like really start maybe until the late 1970s, right, and had this like intense boom. Yeah, you could say it started with Balaraba Ramat's novel, Wazir Aureja Hila, in the 70s, or Hafsat Abdulwahid's novels, and both of them kind of wrote, I think, 76 or thereabouts, right? And then between the 70s and 80s and 90s, right, there was a huge boom in the Soya novels and all of that, and I did read a lot of that. In my teenage years, I read a lot of that. They're very important work, very, very important because of the context in which it is produced. These are women who usually don't have voices outside of their houses who are writing most of these novels. And they're kind of giving you insight about the lives that they have to live, right? Whether by design or by choice. And that's the circumstances that they're in. Through that, even if it feels like, it's all about love, but that love is kind of embedded in the social context. Often we don't look at the social context that these novels are kind of set in. We just look at the story itself. And that's kind of a simplistic way of approaching it. But there's more to it, right? There's more to it. So the domestic is kind of the social and the political as well. So yeah, I did read a lot of those when I was growing up. I read Mills and Bones in my teenage years. That's a fact. I think that the issue is that we kind of tend to... There's a period of transition, I think, for readers, right? Where you kind of go through phases and you read this thing. For example, I know that like a lot of people in my generation maybe kind of read the Pacesetter series, and then kind of from that they kind of graduated. Some people moved on to like James Hadley Chase and then you think, oh wow, James Hadley Chase is like the most amazing thing ever, right? And then you discover writers like Jeffrey Archer, and you're like, oh, okay, this is better, right? And then you grow as a reader, and you move on to like the Ludlums, and then you move on to like literary fiction, right? And you discover people like Marquez, and you're like, oh, okay, there's a different way of writing that is very deep. So now I think the problem with readership in Nigeria is that we don't have this kind of books that transition people from one level to the other. So it's either you start reading literary fiction, and for some people it just doesn't make sense because they don't have that opportunity of growing as readers. They just like jump from one place to another. And then some just find the romance novels and they're like, yeah, you know what, this is my comfort zone. I just want to stay here. I just don't want to grow as a reader. So yeah, that's it. I was an eclectic reader while I was growing up. So that has kind of informed how I write as well.
Not as succinct as you put this, but I remember whenever I'm talking about readership, I say things like this, and even when people ask me for books, I make sure to keep them away from literary fiction and give them the simple ones. Yeah. I gave somebody the Famished Road, and they came back and they gave it to me. So I learned.
Yeah. The thing is, you have to like understand where people are at that point in their lives, in terms of their reading culture or their reading habits, and then kind of advance them. Someone like Helen Habila, for example, spoke about this when he said his generation of writers and readers kind of grew up reading crime fiction and then moved on to pace setters and then moved on to literary fiction. And he noticed that there's a gap because the crime fictions are no longer there and the pace setters are no longer there. So at that point in time, he was trying to set up a publishing house that would produce crime fiction from Nigeria. Right. That didn't go as well as I thought he hoped it would. But he's like very conscious that we need to create this bridge through which people would grow to reach literary fiction. But if you write literary fiction, no matter how amazing it is, and you dump it on someone who has not reached that level yet, they'll be like, what is he talking about? Why can't he just say this thing straightforward? You have to be like very cognizant of the generation of readers we have now, the Gen Zs, the millennials, whose attention span is like super, super short, who have not grown into literary fiction yet. Maybe in the next few years they will appreciate it, but right now they are maybe not there because we don't have that tradition of crime fiction and light literary fiction like the pace setters and things like that.
I'll just go back to the book now because we'll come back to readership later. So I'm still going to go back to the idea of place because I like the elements of fiction so much. I talk about them every time. The way you write place has always been brilliant to me. It's like you find the spaces where you can infuse some reality into it. Like when you talk about Kande's husband, there's a line where he dies on the Abuja-Lokoja Expressway. That was very subtly done. I liked it so much. And there's always this trifecta of places. There's Jos, there's Abuja, there's Kaduna, and then there's Kano. How do you get to the heart of a place so succinctly? As in, how do you find that balance, even in the chaos of the story, to just inject place in those quiet spaces when even the story is going on like this, but we are getting that sense and those waves of the place?
I mean, for me, place has always been important, like super important, because when I tell you, like, my social orientation is shaped by growing up in Jos, and I've accepted that. I know how I was influenced by growing up in a place like that. I've always been observant, right from childhood. Observe people and how people behave in different spaces. And I've always been cognizant that space influences how people behave and react to certain things. The way a Nigerian in the US is going to behave is going to be different from the way a Nigerian in Nigeria is going to behave. The way that Nigerian who may be from the southeast is going to behave in the north is different from the way he's going to behave in the southeast. And the same way that a northerner is going to behave in the north will be different from the way he's going to behave in the south. Those things are kind of things that I'm very cognizant about, and I know that different places influences people differently. And growing up in a certain space kind of influences your thinking or your orientation. We may not realize it, but that is something that you carry maybe for the rest of your life. So I've kind of always been cognizant of that, and I've always been observant about places and people because I find places and the relationship they have with the people very fascinating. So everywhere I go to, I kind of like try to get a sense of that place. What does that space mean to the people who live there? How does it influence their behavior and their thinking and their orientation? What are the kind of cultural influences that shape those thinking? And once you're able to kind of understand that, it makes sense. When you see people behave in a certain way, you kind of understand where it's coming from. You know it's not coming out of a vacuum. And every story you write comes from a place. Yeah, you could say, well, it's coming from my imagination, but it is centered on a place. And that place is always going to have an influence on it. When I started writing, I was very conscious that, of course, I'm very familiar with the literature in Hausa, which I feel feels kind of talk to Northerners about the North. It talks. Basically, it's a conversation that Northerners are having with themselves. And when I look at the body of Nigerian literature, I don't see Northern voices. I don't see people like myself existing in those conversations. If there's a Northerner in the literature, most often it's either as a security man that is there for the purpose of being laughed at because of his accent or because of this or that. And I'm like, as a country, we can't grow if we keep kind of stereotyping people and saying, oh yeah, Yoruba people are like this. And if as a northern writer, I'm going to write a Yoruba character, I'm just going to make a fool of him and demean him. Or if I'm putting an Igbo character in my novel, then he has to be like a crook or a drug seller or something or this or that. And I felt like, yeah, we're not approaching this thing right. There's so much potential in literature as a unifying factor and an enlightening factor as well. And this is how you get to see people. And we've always had this problem in Nigeria where we have perceptions about people. We just form opinions. We don't want to engage with the people and the culture to understand, wait, why is this person thinking like this? Why is he behaving like this? So when you read the literature of people and you see the cultural orientations that they have, you tend to understand them better as a people. Unfortunately, I've had people some of them have lived in the North, right? And they read Season of Crimson Blossoms and they're like, wow. Even though I lived in the North, I never really understood the North as I did from reading this book. I felt like what I did with that was sort of like open a window, right, where people could look in and see how people actually live in the North and what guides their interactions and their decisions and choices. So I've always felt like there's more to literature that can be done with that, and you have to understand the place before you understand the people. So that's important to me. So the Northerners I saw in a lot of this literature, I mean, sometimes I recognize them, sometimes I don't. I'm like, yeah, this is just a ridiculous, very simplistic representation of people. And I felt it was important to kind of contribute stories that will kind of enlighten people about how these people who come from this particular place, right, behave, and what guides their behavior and all of that. And to be able to do that, then that representation has to be authentic. If it's just has to feel real, right? If it's Kano has to feel real. If it's Akwanga has to feel real. It has to be like, this is how the people are, this is why they're this way. So that's something that I take very seriously because I know what I'm trying to achieve with this literature. And I know even if I don't want to say I'm representing the North, because nobody appointed me to represent anybody, I've always felt like I'm representing my characters, and it's important for me that they are as authentic as they can be, and that means that the places that they come from have to be as authentic as possible.
Thank you for that.
You're
Thank you for
welcome.
that. I'm not old enough to have seen the old time train network. The train feels like it was really woven into like the fabric of people's lives in Nigeria that I haven't seen. And my first question was like, did you really experience the trains? Or, was it from books? Or how did you get the story of those trains and how like they were so, stitched in?
Shama, do you want me to tell you that I'm a vampire?
I would believe.
I mean, growing up, I kind of caught the tail end of that era, right?
Oh.
Yeah, I caught the tail end of that era where the service was dying at that point when I was growing up. So I was conscious of that. And like I said, I've always been very observant. So I kind of took notice of that. And when it died eventually, I was like, why would something like this die? Why would something as beautiful as this kind of just go away? Because of negligence and whatever it is that we're doing with that country that God blessed us with. So I've always been curious about it, and I kind of read up. I listened to conversations. My aunt was married to someone who worked at the railway station, and I could see how that had an impact in their lives as well, because when they stopped getting paid, how their life changed because of that. And so technically he was still working with the railway, but for years there was no salary coming, there was nothing happening, there was like, and you see how that railway kind of made people move and relocate, and cities developed because of that. Places like Afenchan, for example, right? And you see the impact of the training kind of connecting people and connecting stories and building new realities. Call it a venial network, if you like. A network of blood vessels that kind of moves blood from one place to another. And blood is life, right? And the railways kind of move people and their lives to different places, and they start a new story somewhere, but they're carrying pieces of their history with them and planting it in a different place. And you have that convergence of culture, and it's growing into something beautiful sometimes. Sometimes there are tensions, there are frictions that happen, as you see in places like Afenchan, right? And you have that fracture occasionally. And we had that with Nigeria, and we never got it right, which is why Kafanchan for me was like central to the story, right? Because if we had gotten that crisis in Kafanchan right, if I dealt with it properly, the way we're supposed to, probably we won't be having all these things we're having now. And that was why Yeri Lalo somehow kept going back to that place, because that is where everything went wrong for us. So yeah, for me, it's sort of like a mix of that bit of history that I caught and the nostalgia of what it was, what it had been, and what it could have been.
I think there's a line. Everything here is across the train tracks. I, uh, what piece of history is hidden in that line?
It's that recognition that everything is connected in a way, right?
Oh,
Where the lines are kind of central to everything. So it doesn't matter which part of the city you live on, you always have to like cross the rail line to connect with the other people on the other side. Right? So that centrality of the rail line and the centrality of human connection that we have as a people. Right? So you have to leave your comfort zone to cross this line, and it has to be deliberate. Like, I'm deliberately crossing over to the other side to engage with the people on that side.
you're moving now to Jeremy Lalo because I think he came up in your last answer. I'm wondering if are there slices of him that are a little autobiographical?
That's always funny. I think people want to read you into stories that you write. For a long time, there were people who swore, and they were willing to swear by their mothers that I was Hassan Reza. That his experiences were mine. That there were people who tried to say, "Oh, you actually look like him," and sometimes they say, "Oh, you sound like him," or something like that, which is funny to me, right? Because I guess if I wanted, I could maybe sound like him. Kaganeko, you know.
Yeah.
But no, I honestly don't think so. I'm a very private person. And when I say I'm a very private person, I mean like I'm a very private person. And I've always had this idea like I haven't lived the most fantastical life, even if some people want to disagree with that. But I don't feel like I want all that attention on me. I'm the kind of person who would walk into a place, into a hall, and just quietly sit at the back and I'm completely comfortable with that. If I have to sit at the front, that's also fine, but I'm not the person who'd want to go somewhere and say, you know what, notice me, look at me, I'm here. So I don't want to like center my story or my experience and say, hey, you know what, I like have this amazing thought, or I've like had this amazing experience that you have to witness because I'm special or something like that. So I try not to kind of center myself in my stories, and kind of prioritize my characters. They are more important, they are central. It's their story anyway, so it's not about me. If I'm going to write my biography, if ever I'm going to do that, then I'll do that, and that will be my story, right? So I don't kind of live vicariously through my characters to say, okay, you know what, because I didn't do this in my life, maybe I'll do it through my characters and live that experience. Or maybe there's some thoughts that I want to voice out, and I'll say, you know what, I'm going to use the voice of my characters to do that. No, that's not who I am. So if you're trying to read me into the stories, well, you're welcome to join the long line of people who have been doing that for years. But no, I don't think I do that. But I also admit that there are experiences that you have, and they kind of creep into your writing, right? Because writing comes from experience as well. Sometimes when people say, "Oh, write what you know," but what do you know? It's always going to bleed into what you're writing, even when you're writing what you don't know. That is the reality of writing. So yes, it bleeds in sometimes, but I never like centralize myself in my character's life.
I can see that. Oh,
You don't sound
you said
convinced
you're a
at
private
all.
person now. Well, because
Yeah, yeah.
now you said you're a private person, so I feel weird asking this question, but let me try to let me put it in context. So first, there's a deep respect for older women in your work, and there's a lot of care to like look at these characters. So this was in the book discussion. I was trying to make them understand that when a man, because there's this tendency that men don't see women. I'm like, okay, so when a man has like a very good experience with, let's say, his mother or the women in his life, when he's writing about women, there's that extra care to see them as human beings. So, of course, my first question is, where does this interest in these interior lives of women come from? Because it's like at Leila's dedicated level of interiority, because we're going down into what they think. But there's this humanity that they have that I usually don't find when men write about women.
It's strange that you, a man, is asking that question. Because I hardly see people ask women like, "Oh, you write your men so convincingly. Where does that come from?" Which for me is just kind of weird, because men and women exist in this world. Men and women have always interacted from time immemorial. If they hadn't, we wouldn't be here. So there's always been that interaction, that whatever it is that's been going on, a lot of it has been going on. So when people ask questions like that, it just makes it feel like women are either aliens that men are not supposed to understand. So when a man writes a woman and sort of maybe makes the effort to get it right or gets it right, or even though some people might think, well, yeah, that's not how women are supposed to be, which is interesting and funny. But I'm not saying that I'm writing women, I'm just writing my female characters. I think that distinction is important. If women kind of relate with them, that's great, fantastic. If they don't, that's unfortunate. The point I'm trying to make is that women are not generic, just the same way that men are not generic. When women say, "Oh, men are scum," I'm like, yeah, some men are scum, some men are incredible, and some women are scum, right? And some women are incredible as well. For me, it's like an individual thing. Every woman is different from the next, right? And where some women would decide, you know what, this is what I want for my life, this is what is good for me. Others will be like, yeah, that's kind of nonsensical, that's not good for you. Every individual has to make their own choices. And those choices are often guided by cultural orientation, social beliefs, things like that. It comes from a place. It comes from accumulation of experiences and influences, right? So the influences and experiences that one woman has is never going to be the same as the other woman, right? Even if, for example, they are raised in the same household. For example, Binta Zubero, right? Her character is raised in the same social context as her younger sister. They're raised by the same parents, but they went through different experiences in life. They had sort of different social influences. Same father, same mother, same context. Different choices, different influences, different outcomes in life. At some point, I kind of asked myself, like, why do you write sometimes from the female perspective? Why do you do that? And I remember the moment I had this doubt was after writing Season of Crimson Blossoms, before it was published, and I wrote a short story from a female point of view as well. And I started asking my question. I went and I sat by this lake, and I was thinking about my life and my writing. I'm like, is it possible that women are going to accuse you of appropriating the female voice to write their stories? And I remember hearing Binta's voice distinctively saying that, you know what, it doesn't matter what others think. This is my story, and that is it. If other women relate to it, that's fine. If they don't, that's also fine. But not all women are the same, and every woman has her experience, and this is my story, and you should be content with that. And that gave me the confidence to say, okay, you know what, this is Binta's story. And that's it. I think I've shared this experience before because it's like super significant to me. When the first Kaba Fest, the Kaduna Arts and Book Festival, was happening in Kaduna, I think this was in 2017. 2017. I was in Germany for a residency, right? And they asked me to come for the festival, and I said, oh well, at the time of this festival, I'm not going to be in Nigeria. I'll be in Germany. And they said, no, you have to be there. It's the first literature festival in the north. You just have to be there. We're going to bring you to for the festival and take you back to finish what you're doing. And I said, fine. And then I heard people say, oh yeah, boycott this festival because of this and that. And I thought it was ridiculous because this is a region where we've had Boko Haram, right, telling people not to read books, not to go to school, not to have conversations like that. And now you have a festival where people are going to talk about books and talk about social issues in a way that probably has never been done before. These are the people I'm writing about, and they're going to have conversations about this book, and they want me to have conversations about this book. And someone is saying, well, don't go because of some stupid politics. So I went and I attended and had this encounter with this elderly woman whom I didn't know at the time. But I discovered later that she's one of the pioneers of the Soyeya novels, right? Arguably one of the first pioneers of Hausa Soyeya novels. And she wrote from her experience of being married early and being divorced at a very young age and having to kind of rebuild her life and all of that. So I was told that, oh, Haja is looking for you at the festival. I'm like, who is Haja? And people just kept saying, oh, Haja is looking for you. And I'm like, well, what does she want? They say, oh, you will know when you meet her. So, so there was this like, and these are like respectable people telling me, oh, Haja is looking for you. So when I met her eventually, they're like, this is Haja. And Haja and she sees my hair and held my hair. And she's like, you're a very bad person, a very naughty boy. So I'm like, oh, okay, shit. I'm going to like get this moralization because I wrote a novel about an elderly woman doing naughty things. So she rambled for a while, and I was trying to like make sense of where's this conversation going to. Of course I did get the sense that I was a bad boy and I did something wrong. She now got to the point that you wrote this novel about this woman who is going through this experience, and basically it came down to this is my experience, right? This is what I went through, and this is what women in my generation, women of my age, are going through. And for her experience was that, of course, her husband divorced her and all of that, and her children decided, okay, you know what, we're going to like keep our mom somewhere, get her a place to stay, but our father can't be single, so they organized for their father to remarry immediately. And she said, every time I have male visitors, my children will be frowning and making faces. And she's like, She's a very interesting woman. She says, "Uncle over." And she's like, "You married a wife for your father, and then you want me to just stay? Like, what do you think I am? Like, I'm dead inside or what? Right? I don't have a life. I'm not supposed to have any kind of life after this." So there was that pain that she spoke about, and she said, Your novel kind of gave voice to our experience, and it's not just me. There are like lots of women like me that I know who go through these experiences, and a lot of them don't find an outlet, so they go to their rooms, they lock the door, they cry, they wipe their tears, and they come out and pretend everything is okay, and they start smiling. And she said, You gave Binta Zubairu an outlet, and then you went and you did something with it, so you have to go back and fix it, right? And that's what she said. And that was the bad thing that I did, that I have to go back and fix it and do right by Binta. That for me was one of the greatest validation I've had, more than the prizes, more than anything, because these are the real women who feel this is our experience, right? This is authentic, this is genuinely us. And I'm glad that it brought that conversation to the forefront and people talked about it. And a lot of people, a lot of younger people have shared that experience, and they're like, reading this book made me rethink my relationship with my mom. I've seen her. And there was one person who said, Your novel made me very uncomfortable because my father died a long time ago, and I've never thought my mother should have any kind of relationship with anybody. Right. But reading your novel made me rethink all of that. And I'm like, yeah, I've been unfair to my mom by the way I've treated her because of her basically just wanting to be human. So yeah, that was validation for the writing for all of that. And I think we've always had this attitude that after a certain age, people's lives are essentially over, so they should just go and sit down and wait to die, more or less. And it's the same for men, but it's worse for women. Often we think, oh men, after a certain age, yeah, I just wait to die, and basically that's it. But we forget that these people have had a life before, they've had experiences, and they still have longings and desires and things like that. That that I'm speaking about it, I've always thought like, yeah, we just can't obliterate people based on their age, kind of erase them from reckoning, more or less. And I remember distinctly reading The Passport of Malam Ilya, right, Cyprian and Quincy, and that opening scene where this young man looks at that old man on the train, and he's like, oh, this old man is dirty and disgusting and all of that. And then he sees the old man with a passport. And remember, this was in the 1910s, 1919 or thereabout, right? And he's like, how is it possible that a dirty old man like this has a passport? And he starts learning the story of the man, and the man tells him, and he discovers, wow, damn, this man has lived. This man has had experiences. This man has been motivated by something the entirety of his life. And then the old man is no longer just a dirty old man. He becomes a fascinating person, fascinating character. So I think that fascination has come from there, from a long time ago, and I read that, and I'm like, you know what? These old people actually have valuable experiences that we can learn from. They have a lot to teach us, and we shouldn't just dismiss them because they've passed a certain age and we just feel like, yeah, they're no longer in charge of anything.
What was the relationship with your mother like? I mean, I could tell you about mine. Mine was my best friend, and I didn't know she was my best friend until she died. And I looked around and I did not have any friends. And I was like, wow, that was my best friend. I was just killed.
My mom is still alive, fortunately, and she's been a great inspiration to me. I mean, I had a difficult childhood, and for me, it's like really, it's incredible to look back and see how my mother moved heaven and earth for me and my siblings. And you see that, and now that we are all grown up, right, we see how small she is. You know, I mean, she's not like really tall or anything, and we're all taller than her, and sometimes she looks like really small and all that. And she was married early, you know. She married very, very. She was taken out of school to marry my dad, Um, so you understand this person kind of sacrificed her own life and her own dreams. And then when things got difficult, she stepped up, like in a big way, and put herself on the line every single day to make sure that your future is good, um, to make sure that you become a success. And she spends the night praying for you, uh, sacrificing her own comfort, even now, right? And you kind of look at that and you're like, there's nothing that I've done that is enough for this person. Uh, and the only thing you can think of doing is like just do something that would make other people appreciate their own moms as well, you know, in little ways. So for my characters, of course, there's always that appreciation of their moms, their mothers, and things like that. Yeri Malalo, for example, had this very deep appreciation for his mother, which was why he kept wearing that shoe, even if he didn't like the shoe. But the fact that his mother got it for him meant that he was honoring her by wearing the shoe and just sticking with it. Um, Reza had a complicated relationship with his mother and all of that. And for me, that was significant for people to kind of understand that, yes, sometimes some mothers choose themselves, right, over their own children. Sometimes they kind of try to make amends, like Reza's mother tried to do. Um, but by that point, like, it was kind of late. He was like already angry and all of that. But that kind of puts a different dynamic to the kind of relationship. And there are people who have relationships like that with their mother, um, because their mothers were in a position where they had to choose themselves. And even though they may grow up angry and hateful and spiteful because of that, when you look at it, you kind of think, well, maybe she was in a difficult position too, right? Maybe I need to be a bit more understanding of the circumstances around her making a decision. I've always been like super big on context, right? Because a person made a decision doesn't mean that the person is bad. It's always important to me personally to kind of look at the context. What is the context in which that person made that decision? And Memuna, Reza's mother, kind of, there is a context to her making that decision. People may say, well, she was a bad mother or something, but her parents weren't kind to her either, when they said, oh, you have to marry this person, even though she didn't want to. And from that, you see the contrast between her and Binta, who was also in a similar position where her parents said, you have to marry this person, right? And out of obedience to her parents, she did it and stuck with it, even though she wasn't happy in it. Maimuna was like, fuck that shit, I'm not taking this. And she left. She made her own choices, right? Season of Crimson Blossoms, for example, for me, it's more about the relationships, different types, right? Between parents and children and all of that. All the different types of relationships that kind of existed in that novel. So for me, that context is important. It has always been important. And when I write, it's because I've had women who have been in my life who stood up and said, you know what, you are going to be a success. And they made sacrifices and they made efforts and all of that. So the main story itself, The Whispering Trees, someone read it and the person called me and said, he started by thanking me. And I said, for what? He said, you made me realize a mistake I've made and you gave me the opportunity to go and correct it. So this person had bought a phone for his mom, and you know how Nigeria is. There was no light, so she sent the phone to a charging station or something, and somehow the phone got missing. So she told him that, oh, something happened, my phone was stolen. And he thought, oh, mom, you're just careless, right? And, so you're going to be phoneless for a while. So he had the means to buy her a phone, but he thought, maybe I'm just going to punish her a bit by not buying her a phone immediately. I'll buy it, but it will be later, right? As a disciplinary measure or something like that. And then he read The Whispering Trees, where this person kind of missed the opportunity because he lost his mother at that point and missed that opportunity and realized that, oh, I missed that opportunity to do right by my mom. And that made him think, oh, wow, so why am I punishing this woman who has sacrificed everything for me and given me everything? So he went quietly, immediately, and bought a phone and sent it to his mother. And he called me and he said, thank you for making me do that. That wasn't what I had in mind when I was writing the story. I didn't have him in mind and his relationship with his mother. But if that story made him kind of appreciate his mother and do something good for her, I'll take that any day. Because, mothers are like the good ones and the bad ones. They must have done something incredible for their children, given the circumstances, given everything, the sacrifices that they make. So, they're very important. And I think I'm glad that it's kind of projecting in my novel, on my works, that these are like really important people in our lives.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that answer. So I would move over to, I think I have a few questions on romance, because personally, you are like my king in romance right now in Nigerian literature. I don't think there's anybody that is doing it like Abubakar Adam Ibrahim. Thank you very much. Yeah. Why I say this is because I was swiping through Instagram and I saw a video where they were like, why is it that Nigerian male authors don't write romance? And I quickly pressed. I was like, so you don't consider When We Were Fireflies romance? And they were like, no, it's literary fiction, it's speculative fiction. And I'm like, I understand the marketing classifications, but are you going to read that book and tell me that there's no romance in there?
No, I don't consider myself a romance writer. Well, it depends on what I'm writing and when I'm writing it, right? Sometimes I feel like I'm a social realist. Sometimes I feel like I'm a magical realist. Even if I'm very conscious that my magical realism is very rooted in social realism as well. Romance, I don't specifically think I'm a romance writer. And I remember, I think this was in 2014 or thereabouts, when my publishers at the time decided that, we're going to do this romance stories written by literary fiction writers. And they contacted a bunch of other writers as well, and said, we need you guys to write us love stories. I'm like, that's not what I do, right? They're like, yeah, that's the idea. We want people who don't consider themselves romance writers, who are literary fiction authors, to write love stories. And we want to see how that is going to turn out. And I'm like, romance stories usually involve a man meeting a woman, and maybe they fall out or they don't like each other at first, and then they get to meet each other and they know each other and they fall in love and they can't do with each other, and then they fall out of love or they have a quarrel and they go their separate ways, and then they come back together and they realize, oh yeah, we can't do without each other, right? That's the formula, sort of. And the story ends with them either making love or going to marry or do something like that. Happy ending. I'm like, that's not me. If you read my work, that's not me. And they're like, yeah, we still want you to do it. I'm like, basically, like, I have to kill someone in every one of my stories. And they're like, absolutely no killing of anybody. I'm like, yeah, then I'm not doing it. That's not me. They were very insistent. And I wrote this love story for it, this anthology. I mean, it's a love story. I would say it's a romance story. It's a love story. Very weird love story, right? So no, I don't think of myself as a romance writer in any way. Even though I acknowledge that When We Were Fireflies, for me, is sort of like, it's a novel about sort of everything. Because if you say, well, is it magical realism? Maybe not. Is it social realism? It is, it may not be. It's a travel story. It's an adventure novel, maybe. It's literary fiction, yes. So for me, it's just like everything. Right? I think it's sort of like a culmination of all the different kind of literature that I like, a convergence maybe of all that. Travel, adventure, the fantastical, the magical, and the very, very real, which is important to point out. And in all of this, there's always going to be love and hate. Is it a love story? I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I think it's a story about love, not a love story. Um, and I think predominantly it's also a story about hate, right? Because the motivation that got him to leave his house was the hatred that he felt for the people who he thought hated him enough to do those horrible things to him, right? So for me, it's just that hatred. Like, okay, I hate these people because they hated me and did these horrible things to me, and I need to go get my own pound of flesh back. And then we realized that it's a more complex situation than that. It's not just black and white. So
You're neither a romantic nor a romance writer, but you are able to inject steamy romance into stories. Okay, I got it. I've completed trials now. I know what to say in the next discussion.
maybe I'm trying to kind of defy labels. I think that's it, right? Maybe I'm trying to avoid labels and just be like super open about everything. If it's going to be a romance novel, maybe if people want to see it as a romance novel, that's fine. If that is what works for them. I just want to retain that freedom to kind of shift into different genres and write what I want to write when I feel like writing it. Not box myself in one category and say, oh, this is what I'm definitely going to be. Something like that.
Oh, with writing like that, they can't label you if they tried.
Uh,
Yeah. Only take
there are
position.
people whose job is it is to label people, right? Academics and things like that. They'll always have to
Yeah.
label you to make sense of what you're doing. So I understand where that is coming from. It's a very valid and genuine procedure to categorize and understand something. But yeah.
In When We Were Fireflies, I think Jerry Malalo, when he was asked why did he join the army, it felt like he joined the army. I think the answer he gave was something like, I was a little child, I didn't know anything, and I was sort of looking for myself. And what entered my head, I now finished forming the thought. I was like, you said that when a man is looking for himself, he joins the army. What would a woman do, generally anyway speaking, do when she's looking for herself? And I couldn't really come up with a very, 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 very good answer for myself. So I was wondering if you could help me answer that generally based on your experience with your characters and what you've seen.
So I think the point of that is that people often go looking for themselves in the wrong places, right? And that's the point of that. He didn't need to go to the army for validation. What motivated him was that he felt people said, oh yeah, maybe because of this thing you maybe are not man enough or something like that. And he just felt like, what is the best way to respond to that is to be the most macho of men that I can be. Right? And how do you become that? He joined the army. You become this brave, gallant soldier and all of that. And that's how you kind of prove that you are a man. That was his own thinking. And the point I was trying to make with that is that we often don't address the issues that need addressing, but we address the symptoms of that issue. And even though he went and joined the army, and then after what happened, he realized, yeah, this is not the place for me. This is not what I want to do. But he still didn't address the thing that he actually really needed to address. Which was why when he had that conversation with Aziza, she's like, are you waiting for us to form a committee to address this issue, which is what we always do in Nigeria, right? There's a problem, we know what the problem is. We actually know what the solution is. But we won't do that. We form a committee and say, oh yeah, let's the committee go and look into the situation and prepare a report, and then we'll form another committee to review the reports that these people present, and then we'll form another committee to draft a white paper from the committee that committee kind of produced. And we just keep wasting our time doing all that nonsense. So that was the whole point of it. His joining the army was looking for answers in the wrong place, and mistakes happened as a result of that decision that he made, which have important consequences. women do make that mistake as well. And sometimes for some women, depending on the cultural context and the circumstances, looking for yourself is like getting married, right? Uh, so you have a lot of women, especially in the north, for instance, not only in the north, but in the south as well, who don't find themselves in their father's houses, right, when they're living with their parents. And they feel, okay, you know what, I need independence, and that independence means starting my own family, getting married. So they marry the person that presents the best opportunity of getting married, even if that person may not be the best husband that they can find, right? So they go looking for themselves in someone else's house as part of a family because they believe, oh, you know, I'm going to have my independence here. We've seen that happen a lot, especially in instances where you have parents who are like really restrictive and all of that, and their children often, just to escape that repression, are to choose to marry early or marry as early as it's possible for them to do so. And they get into situations where in the end they don't recognize themselves because they never found themselves to start with. Um, so it's sort of the same thing, I guess. Yerima joining the army and some girls kind of running away to go and marry someone because they believe in this idea of the independence that they will find uh, in matrimonial homes.
I was into like the more esoteric aspects of the writing, the souls being fireflies. That was a very nice touch,
Thank you.
because I've seen souls becoming like a ball of light. I've seen them, as chains. I've never thought of them as fireflies, and I was wondering whether that was rooted in mythology or that was like really original. So it has been burning on my mind for like about 3 years now since I read the book.
What I can tell you is it wasn't inspired by mythology.
Mhm.
I don't want to be arrogant enough to say that it's original, but I can tell you that I don't think I've read this anywhere before. I was just fascinated by the ideas of fireflies. Like for me, they just like they feel mythical. These are biological entities that emit light. And just looking at them is just so fascinating for me. Like, what if there's more to it, right? This idea of the circle of life, our life just keeps revolving in a way, in the way that we saw Thierry Malalo, right? Just him revolving around whatever it was he's revolving around. And this idea that there's this interconnection between different life forms. So for me, I guess it's just like a homage to different life forms, the supposed interconnection between life forms, the respect for the little lives that we can crush under our shoes if we want, but appreciating the fact that yes, this is something that is fantastic, magical, beautiful, incredible, right? And just appreciating that thing for what it is or what it might be, whatever that is. So I think that is sort of where it came from, this little creatures that could be so much more.
I would call that an original idea personally when it comes to writing. It's an aspect of reality that has been sort of in a way that I haven't read, hasn't been recorded, judiciously, to put it that way. So it was good. One theme I found in that I had also been working on personally, I've been thinking of personally, was love transcending death. It feels like love obviously transcends death, especially when you look at reincarnation, because Yarim Alalo comes and the love that he has felt in his former lives, they are sort of like still present. And I imagine that it could be that maybe love imprints upon time that we spend so strongly that whenever love shows up again, time conforms itself. Time remembers this love and conforms itself into that, shape again and then exists, even if for a brief moment. So that was what I was working on. I was wondering if it was something you had considered or, in your head is shaped differently when you relate these, ideas.
I mean, I've always been fascinated by the enduring power of love, right? People fall in love with people sometimes, and maybe for some reason it doesn't work out, and then years later they kind of reconnect, and something happens or something changes. I remember reading this story of an American soldier who was going off to the World War, right? He had met this girl, he was in love with her. They were madly in love with each other, right? And then the war broke out, and he decided to join the army and go to the war. And in the process, they kind of lost touch with the girl. Something happened. I think she moved or something. So the chain of communication was broken, and she didn't know what happened to him. He didn't know what happened to her. And eventually, they moved on with their lives. She got married. He came back from the war, and they never reconnected. Right. For 60 years or thereabouts. Of course, he got married, had his own family and all of that, and then his wife died. And even though like he's always had that thing for this girl that he met in the 1940s, I never had the chance to finish this whole thing with. And I think this was in the 2000s, right? Yeah. So his wife died, and he found himself like thinking more about this girl that he had met 60 years before. So he puts a newspaper ad just saying, if anybody knows this person who lived in this place in 1940, blah, 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 And someone found that advert, someone who knew this person, and took it to this person, whose husband had also just died, right? And she's like, oh, shit. And they reconnected, and they actually got married after 60 years of separation. So I was like, wow, this is like the enduring power of love, right? Somehow it kind of stays after years of people kind of not being together. But also, when you talk about reincarnation, whether it's real or not, often when it happens, or when you read stories about reincarnation, you discover there's a kind of love that is attached to that story. I think the most famous case of reincarnation ever is what's the name of this woman? She was British, right? And she was born, and she remembered that she was from ancient Egypt. I don't know if you know that story. So yeah, she was born in Britain, I think Scotland, right? And she recalled she had memories of ancient Egypt and all of that. And she, when she could travel, when she was old enough to travel, she just traveled to Egypt. She was able to discover temples and places that were buried, right? She discovered the ruins. Basically, she would go to somewhere and she'd say, oh, there's a building here that was here and there and there, and they would dig and they would find it there, because she believed that she was in her previous life in Egypt, she was an acolyte in a temple, and she documented that. If you Google it, you'll find the story. Her name is Omu something. It's a very well documented story, and for years she kind of lived in Egypt and helped with the discovery of these tombs and all of that. Even if it's not a romantic story like that, you kind of understand that she has a deep love for that place, right? That was in her previous life. There's this like incredible commitment that she has to that space. For me, that is love, right? And she went back and she dug it up and she helped preserve it and document it in a way that shows you the intense love she has for that place, that space. There's another story of this American woman who traveled to Ireland, and because she believes she's the reincarnation of an Irish woman somewhere, and she was able to trace this village and found people that she said were her children. Even though they were older than her and all of that, she started telling them about experiences that they had with their mother, that it wasn't possible for an American, right, coming from the US to know. It was so weird and bizarre and kind of crazy. But for me, the important thing was the love she had for her children was the thing that centered her. Because everything about that story was about how I don't think she even remembered who her husband was, but she remembered her children. And she went and she told them stories about themselves, and they were like really baffled and amazed and all of that. So I mean, like since I wrote this novel, people kind of send me stories about reincarnations that they read somewhere. Like, yeah, we found this, and they thought maybe, because of your novel and all of that. So I get a lot of that now. And I remember this story of this, one of the stories that people sent to me, this little girl in India who was, she was born, she was given a name, and she started calling herself by a different name. She was still a little girl at that point. She was calling herself by a different name. And she said, oh yeah, she has a husband somewhere. She mentioned the name of the village. She mentioned that he has a shop where they sell like radios and things like that. And I think she died at childbirth. That was what she kept telling them. So she kept saying that, and her father was like, why is this girl talking about this? There's no way she could have ever been to that village, right? So he went to the village and he found the store. And he found the owner of the store and he asked him questions. And the owner said, yeah, he lost his wife some years ago, blah, blah, blah. This is what happened, this, that. So he invited the man to come to his house. He didn't tell him what was going on. And the moment the girl saw that man, she said she recognized him as her husband. And she was like super excited. She went and jumped all over him and hugged him. And the man was baffled and confused, like, whose child is this? Why is she like hugging me and petting me as if she had known me and all of? But then they talked, and people realized there's more to that than just like whatever it was that they thought was going on. For me, that's love, right? Her love for the man kind of centered her. And she came back still talking about her love. So is reincarnation real? I don't know. Does it matter if it's real or not? I really don't know. I don't care about it. If it is or not, what I know for sure is that love has this enduring power, right? That sustains people, that makes people do things that normally they wouldn't do. It sort of makes them superhuman in a way, right? When you think about mothers, for example, how fragile they are, how weak they appear to be sometimes, and you see the incredible energy and strength that they have, the incredible resilience that sometimes doesn't make sense to you, right? Like, how is it that this small body or this small frame or this woman who biologically like is weaker than a man, right? But she pulls through this thing and she does incredible things because she loves her children so much, right? She finds this superhuman strength and this superhuman resolve to do something. It's love, right? So love, I mean, I'm not a champion for love. I'm not a romance writer, as you know, but love is just an incredible thing that makes people do incredible things,
Okay, I see that. I shall move into like real history now. I didn't know what Kofa Kabuga. Kabuga in 1903 when the British took control of Kano. I never read that in history for some weird reason. And I know you've told this story how many times, but I don't know. Could you tell me the story of how like the British really took Kano?
We don't teach our own history, and that's a problem, right? I don't think we teach the history of the colonial conquest of Nigeria. Right? We hardly ever talk about it, to be honest. I didn't study history in school. It's just unfortunate, but I did. I grew up with this fascination for history, and I found this history textbook that my dad had, and I binged on it and I read it. I think it was called The History of West Africa or something like that. I was a science student in secondary school, but I read that book several times over and over and over and over again because I enjoyed it so much, right? That history, the rise of empires, the fall, all of it. I don't recall there being a mention of the colonial conquest of West Africa because it wasn't about the colonial conquest. But, every other history that I've read, to find even the history of the colonial conquest of West Africa is kind of like really sketchy. There aren't a lot of contemporary books that engage with that. If you want to journey in history, you maybe have to like go to the archives of the British Museum or things like that. The archives of Ariel House, I'm sure they would have something about that. But it's very scanty. So people don't understand what exactly happened in that period and how that conquest did happen. But I was fascinated and I wanted to kind of find out how that happened. And so I went back and I looked at it, and found the information. I mean, like I have some knowledge of that, right? So the point was just to kind of validate the knowledge that you have, that yes, this is exactly when it happened and how it happened and all of that. So of course the British came to Nigeria, used the policy of divide and rule. It is true that the Sokoto Caliphate at that time, which was the prevalent government in the northern region, right? It was oppressive. It was mostly unjust. There was a lot of slave taking perpetrated by the caliphate officials. That was a major thing for lots of people. I know there's like a tribe in Adamawa states who are called like descendants of slaves, and for a long time they were kind of still being discriminated on that because they were enslaved a lot. So you have all of that social injustice going on at the time, right? And when the British came, they decided, there's an opportunity here. There's a powerful caliphate that's kind of is oppressive to its people and all of that. So what do? They recruited people. A lot of them were Hausa soldiers that they recruited, trained them, and used them to fight the caliphate, more or less. Right? And that was what happened. So they took one emirate after the other, and eventually they took Kano, I think, in 1903. Kano at the time had this fence around it, and they thought that was going to be one of the determining factors. But the British had cannons, right? And they had the Maxims, which were powerful machine guns of that age that were used to kind of wipe out the Kano army and conquer the city. I will be writing a lot more historical fiction going forward. I can tell you that a lot of people don't even know that parts of Nigeria were under German occupation at some point in our history. You didn't know that? A lot of people don't know that history. So as late as 1914, there was a German fort in Nigeria.
Still on things that we don't talk about. I'm currently hunting for a lot more records about what happened in Jos in, I think, 2002. At that time, I think I was living in Kaduna. I have never gotten the full story. I get only slices of it in like the fiction and maybe some anthropological text and maybe like personal accounts. And these personal accounts are very angry. They are very biased. But you said you moved out of Jos by 2010, so I would imagine that in 2002 you were there in Jos. And
I was, yeah.
what did it feel like? What happened that morning?
It felt horrible. It's like genuinely horrible, because all my life I grew up in Jos, right? I lived with Christians. I lived with Igbos and Yorubas and Birams and all of that. We were in the same communities, right? So I had friends across all these tribes. I mean, you have this childish thing where sometimes you fight with them. You have all this very good moments, right? When at Christmas, you eat their food. At New Year, Salah, they eat yours. It's like this very normal relationship that you have with people as children. And then you grow up and you see all of that kind of being torn apart by politics. And politics had a lot to do with whatever happened in Jos. I think more politics than religion, to be honest. It was sad to see. I mean, I remember like going hiking on the Shere Hills, where we just go on these adventures and walk, and you find communities of, I'm Muslim, of course, you find Christian communities, and you're walking by and they'll be like, hey, come and join us and eat, right? They don't know you, you don't know them. You're just hiking on the mountains or on the hills, and they're walking by these places, and you see people who would invite you to join them in their feast. They would offer you water, you would take, for us then, it was just, we grew up with this idea that if you offer somebody food and they don't take it, that they probably have bad intentions. So you would offer food to your neighbors, they would offer food to you as a way of kind of social bonding that communities have. So to just have people like that kind of torn against each other just didn't make sense to me. I remember the very first conflict that happened in 2001, September 7. I remember where I was then. I had gone to the mosque to pray as I did. And we went to this mosque specifically because, like, all of my secondary school friends, or most of them, some of them, right, we sort of had this agreement to, like, go to that mosque to pray every Friday and reconnect. So, like, we had this Friday thing that we do. So we pray and then we stand around and gist and just have conversations and all of that. So we had prayed and we were having this conversation, and then one of those boys who was our junior in secondary school when we were still in secondary school came back, and he's like, "I'm Farah." And like, "I'm Farah Mini. I'm Farah Fada, you know." And like, "Fada, who and who are fighting?" He says, "Oh, Muslims and Christians." You know, we laughed. We actually laughed. We were like, he had always been this kind of funny person anyway, right? So we're like, "Please, you know, take your nonsense jokes and leave this place." And it's like, okay, he's going to go and get ready because he's seeing something is happening somewhere. So we stood, we continued our gist, and then we saw a column of smoke rising from somewhere. That was from Congo, from the Congo area. That's where it actually started. You know, we saw a column of smoke rising, and we were like, "Is that like a house burning or something?" And then suddenly there was this tension that you could feel, and then suddenly you saw people on motorbikes being driven with blood like flowing from their heads or something, and like, okay, there definitely seems to be something going on, right? But we're like, but who is going to like genuinely just start fighting? Like, you know, I'm a Muslim, so I'll just say Christian and start killing him, and the Christians that I know will just start killing me just like that. It took us a while to kind of come to terms with what is actually starting to happen. So we stood there and we tried to like joke it off and be like, "Oh yeah, you know, it's going to be sorted out, whatever it is that's going on there." And then you kind of see more and more people being rushed back with their heads broken, with injuries, with things like that. So they just kind of quietened down, and then eventually people were like, "Yeah, maybe we should go home and just sort out things." So seeing that fracture was very, 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 very painful to witness. This community that you've known all your life, where you could just go into any neighborhood, right? Walk in, you're safe, you're fine. If you're thirsty, you can knock on anybody's door and just ask for water, and they'll offer you water from the goodness of their hearts. And then suddenly, these are the same people that are supposed to be killing you, and you're supposed to be killing them. It really didn't make sense to me. And even when I went home, and everyone was quiet, people were like tensed, and there were reports coming of fighting here and there, it still didn't make sense, right? Until the fighting got to my area on Saturday. I mean, Friday evening, there were people who came and wanted to start trouble. And we're like, "No, we're not going to do that yet," right? But then Saturday morning, it became inevitable because there was like a horde of people who had come with weapons and things. And it was really hard to witness. It's still hard to kind of come to terms with this society and culture that had existed for a century, maybe more than a century actually. It's just like tearing itself apart. Because politicians found a way to say, "Oh yeah, you know, this appointment should go to this person because he's one of us, and that person is not one of us because he's from a different religion or a different tribe or whatever." Unfortunately, that has become the reality of just, and as a Muslim, you have to like be careful where you go into. As a Christian, you have to like watch where you're going to. And that's not the Jos that I knew growing up, right? So for me, it's kind of like really hard to process all of that. I lived through the violence, 2001. There was another round in 2002. There was several rounds in 2002 actually. 2004, 2008, 2000. Yeah, like it was consistent. Like sometimes there are several clashes in a year. Lots of people dying. You know, there are people we spent Friday night with doing neighborhood patrol, and Saturday morning they were dead. They were killed by people who knew them, right? The house I lived in was burnt down by my Christian neighbors that we used to play football with on Sundays. And people say, well, you don't talk about it a lot. I'm like, yeah, what's the point of talking about it? I prefer to remember the Sunday mornings that we played football than thinking about when they decided to burn down my house and burn down everything that I had. I prefer to remember that wonderful Christian man who gave me my first job and who made his family mine. Who every time I come back from school, they would have food ready for me and be like, hey, you look hungry, come eat. And I would joke about it. And even when I'm not hungry, they'll be like, yeah, but we save this food for you. It's yours. You have to eat it, right? And whose children would not allow themselves to be carried by anyone else but me and my brothers, right? I prefer to remember that. I prefer to remember all of that than the hate and the violence that followed. So when people say, one person is the victim of the other person's violence, I don't want to talk about my victimhood, because for me that's not what I am. I'm not a victim, right? I suffered from the crisis. I lost a lot, but I also remember the moments where people did extraordinary things, where Muslims did everything they could to put their lives on line to save Christians, where Christians did everything they could to save their Muslim neighbors. For me, that is the humanity I prefer to hold on to, right? So when I write my stories and I talk about the violence in Jos, for example, with Binta Zubairu, right? Her husband was killed by his Christian neighbors, people who knew him. Some of them worked for him. Both of us were perpetrators. Both of us were victims, right? Even though her sister's family were killed by Christians, she remembers distinctly that the person who saved her sister's children and her sister herself was another Christian woman whose husband had been killed by Muslims, right? So she knew her husband had been killed by Muslims, but she decided to save this Muslim family. So there are stories like that we kind of choose to ignore because we prefer to promote the hateful stories. And I just want us to kind of see this violence, this social disorder that we have is a product of somebody's greed, because somebody wants a certain position, so he plays on people's sentiments, religion, and things like that. But then there are those stories about how humanity prevailed over all of these things. And for me, I just prefer to focus on those stories. I remember those,
Thank you so much. If this was difficult for you, I apologize.
It's okay. I mean, there's something that happened that day. That Saturday, that's September 8th, right? When a horde of Christian, they call them Christian youths, right, came to basically decimate my community. And before the whole fighting began, we were kind of trying to find ways to not have that encounter, because it didn't make sense, to be honest. It really made no sense. And I could see the confusion amongst them as well. They were confused, and we're like, why should we start fighting each other? And they're like, yeah, they're killing Christians over there, right? And we're like, yeah, they're killing Muslims over there as well, right? And now you guys have come to do that as well to us here. And there was this guy who called my name. You know how someone calls your name because he knows you? And I looked at this person. He was looking fierce. He had war paint on his face. I did not recognize this person. And he called me and he said, Bakagane Nubani. No. And in that whole confusion, right, we kind of moved towards each other, and he's like, I'm this person. We were in primary school together. And I remembered, right, he was my friend in primary school. We haven't seen each other since primary school. And now suddenly we are supposed to kill each other. And I'm like, wow. And I remember we shared food with this person while we were in primary school, right? And we had fun together and all of that. And I'm like, wow. So this is you after all these years with war paint and weapons and all of that. And you're supposed to kill me. And he's like, he doesn't understand it as well, right? So it was funny, but not funny. because like suddenly you're supposed to just kill this person that you haven't seen in however many years. It didn't make sense to us at all. So we're like, yeah, this whole thing is just silly. Maybe it shouldn't happen. Maybe it should just stop. There were people who were trying to talk sense. I remember, because we were trying to talk sense, and there were people who were like angling for blood, murder and mayhem. And there was a skirmish. There were shootings. I was shot at. That's for sure. I was shot at. I mean, they missed me, but they shot at me several times. Unfortunately, the army came in just at that point where things were about to get completely out of control. But this was in 2001. Of course, it progressed after that. I lost my place in 2010 because I left just in 2009 when I got a job in Abuja, right? But even with the crisis and everything, Jos still felt like home. And I asked my workplace if I could be transferred back to Jos because I never imagined living anywhere else. And they're like, yeah, no, we have plans to keep you here in Abuja, right? So I was like, okay, I will stay. But for me, Jos was still home. So every weekend, unfailingly, I'll travel back to Jos. So I just felt like Abuja, I was just going for the work days, right? So I'll go with a change of clothes. Everything of mine was still in Jos. Everything. My certificates, everything, right? Everything was in Jos. So I'll take a change of clothes and go to Abuja and work. And as soon as it was weekend, I was heading back to Jos. And that one weekend where I decided I was too tired, I was just going to sit it out. I'm like, yeah, I'm tired. I'll just stay in Abuja and sleep. Right. That was the weekend where my house was burnt and I lost everything in it. So, I made a choice. Like, I'm not going to hold on to heat. I don't have, it's going to hold me down. I really don't want that, And I'm going to prefer to remember the memories, the good ones. I'm going to remember those Christians who stood by me and my Muslim brothers, right? And I'm going to remember the Muslims who stood by the Christians and did the right thing. And those are the things I'm holding on to. So when people want to say, oh yeah, this and that, but I remember the people who were shooting at me were like saying blood of Jesus or something like that, or Jesus is Lord. And I remember the Muslims who were hacking the Christians were saying Allahu Akbar, which, if when you think about it, like this God that made all of us, right? Made all of us, and we're like hacking each other and calling his name. Brother. Yeah. So there's love, there's hate. I am holding on to the love,
Thank you so much. It's just to pull us out of it is reflected very fine. With Fireflies, is the last 60 pages where he meets Karambao. Yeah, I think that I see how Yarima chooses love, not hate, and I thank you so much for choosing love, because thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, I have just two happy questions left.
So, happy ones.
Yeah, happy ones. This one, this is concerning even like your next work. I just don't want to ask about like what are you working on next. I'm asking like, I think you've talked about writing historical fiction, but aside that, what fascinates you right now? Maybe about writing or about like the future.
A lot. I mean, this is a difficult question for me to answer because I'm fascinated by a lot of things, and I suppose that kind of comes through in my writing as well. I'm fascinated by history. I am fascinated by research. I am a journalist, of course. My journalism is very closely connected to my writing. So I've always been a curious person. I've always had that curiosity in me. I've always been observant. I'm often the guy who'd rather just sit quietly and observe than be talking too much. So I'm observing a lot of things. I'm researching a lot of things, different things that I'm interested in. Some of them are very historical, some of them are very contemporary. I've always been really, really interested in understanding how historical context shapes our present realities, right? So now I'm kind of looking at that from perspective of journalism. How has the very complex history of repression, disinformation, and all of that is shaping journalism practice today? So that's one of the things I'm researching. But I'm also like really interested in, I mean, for something I'm working on, like how, again, love and history intertwine, and how that has shaped the outlook of my country. So in a roundabout way, yeah, I'm just interested in a lot of things.
Okay, so my last official question is, yeah, it's about the Flame Tree Writers Workshop because, yeah, I know there was an edition last year, and I think it's probably because you
No,
couldn't come back.
no, there
Ah,
wasn't. Yeah, it's kind of complicated last year.
oh,
Yeah,
what
travel
was?
has been complicated. The US is not what it used to be. Um, and travel is kind of like really difficult now. Every time you're traveling, you have to be like, you don't know, you really don't know, because the policy is constantly changing and it's shifting and all of that. So it's very hard to kind
That's
of
not true.
make a definitive plan about any of those things. I'd wanted to come to Nigeria in June. Uh, that didn't work out. I wanted to come back in December. That didn't work out, So there's a lot of uncertainty about traveling and all of that. So, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm excited though to share that, the last workshop we did, because the whole idea is to kind of produce stories, right, from the workshop and have the stories published and made accessible to people. And even though we didn't have the workshop last year, I have consistently been working on those stories, editing them, polishing them, making sure that we have a platform for those people to kind of put their stories out there. Like I said, the whole idea of telling the stories is not something that one person can do. It has to be a collective effort, and in this collective effort, like, it's very important for every voice to be represented. I mean, we can't represent every voice, but create that platform for as many diverse uh, people in the North, because this edition was centered on the North, right? To kind of have that avenue to express themselves. So that is very important. When you're talking about the Northern story, it's not monolithic. It's very diverse, and this is something we try to reflect in the workshop in selecting the participants as well, and giving them the avenue to express themselves. And one thing I emphasize is that, make sure your stories kind of reflect your culture, your identity, and make it contemporary if you can. If you want it to be historical, that's also fine. But don't be afraid to be genuine. Don't think, oh, my culture, my identity is kind of it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's subordinate, right? Make sure that you write about your identity and your culture. If that is what you choose to write about it with confidence, because you have to believe in your own story because before anyone else does. So that was very important, and I was still working on the series until maybe last week. So now we have the anthology coming out. Um, yeah, we wanted to do printed books. Unfortunately, due to certain changes, we couldn't. So we have like a PDF of the stories. That's the download link is going to go up sometime maybe next week. And people will be able to download the stories and read them. For me, like, even if we had printed out the books, most of it is going to, or all of it is going to go out for free, because we wanted people to kind of access the stories, read them, engage with them, and all of that. So by providing this PDF download, people can just download it for free, absolutely free. Read the stories, engage with them, and hopefully talk about them. So yeah, it would be great for me if you can like maybe host some of the writers from that. Yeah, read the stories, engage with them, talk about it. That is the purpose of the workshop, so that we put out our stories out there.
Gladly, wherever they're talking about stories, I'm there with a mic and
Good.
camera.
Good, fantastic.
Good.
So yeah, maybe I'll send you the PDF and you can engage with that at your own leisure.
I would really appreciate. Thank you so much. I'll be looking out also to learn that also.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully in the future we'll
Yeah.
continue the workshop. Yeah, there are plans to definitely do more workshops and
Yeah.
better ones, hopefully.
Yeah, it's wonderful work. I
Thank
have
you.
gained so much from workshops, and I can only imagine, what this will do. Especially when your workshops are Nigerian, and you don't have to pay so many pounds for a workshop. It's
Well, I mean, this one was free. Like they didn't pay anything. We actually took care of everything for them. We brought them in. We paid flight for them. Bought air tickets for them. Yeah, accommodated them in a wonderful space for free. They didn't pay, like nobody paid a dime for anything. We fed them. We fed them. We actually gave them some allowances to cover for some miscellaneous whatever. So yeah, it was completely free. Nobody paid anything for anything. They got everything. They got feedback from Chika Onigwe, amazing writer, amazing facilitator as well. They got feedback from me. They got to work with me over the last since 2004 up until now on their stories, getting feedbacks and revisions and edits and things like that. So at the end of the day, I hope that they'll all turn out to be better writers, and I look forward to some of them. Nana has published a book. One of the other writers has been offered a deal, So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more of them kind of finding their footing as writers and getting published outside of the anthology.
lucky them. Yeah, slightly.
Slight is fine. We can live with that.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
I wish you the best. I have so many words to wish you, but I would just say I wish you the best. Stronger pen, deeper pen, blacker pen as you write. I look forward to your next work. I will read and sing about it because I do that for fun anyway. So thank you so much. I had a lovely conversation. I hope you did too.
I did, absolutely. So no, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, it's a great conversation. Thank you. Thank you for your incredible insight, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
I thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Your words mean a lot to me. Thank you for appreciating the podcast too. That was really empowering. I celebrated in my room. So
yeah, I mean, you did a fantastic job, honestly.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, people say your podcast was like really incredible. It was amazing. The conversation was very, very insightful. I shared it with my agent, and she thought, yeah, this is like a very, very deep conversation. So yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Fantastic job.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay,
Absolutely.
So I shall leave you now, and have a great day. Have a great month. Have a great year.
Absolutely. I wish you the same. I hope so too. Thank you. Bye.